Hello, Mishpacha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother. Welcome back to my channel. I am here today on December 27th to give you my best and worst reads of 2020. So, as of today, I have read 119 books, and I imagine I will finish up a couple more before the end of the year, so this list of the best and worst does not include my current reading, which is Louise Erdrich's The Last Report on the Miracles at Little No Horse. It also does not include Daniel Silva's The Messenger, nor does it include Jory Graham's collection The End of Beauty, which I am intending to start tomorrow. So it doesn't include those three, but everything else I've read this year, all 119 books, were included in terms of considering this list. So for novels and nonfiction, I sort of have a top 5, but basically I've made it into a top 3 for every category, with 2 honorable mentions that I've included for novels, novellas, and nonfiction. So let us start with fiction, shall we? So honorable mentions in the category of fiction novels were Louise Erdrich's Tracks and Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge. And the top 3 novels that I read in 2020 were number 3, Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, number 2, Toni Morrison's Beloved, and number 1, Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. Y'all, I did not expect the emotional gut punch that I got from Ishiguro's book, Ishiguro's character study of this repressed post-World War II butler named Stevens. If you've heard me talk about this book on my channel before, you will have heard me say many times that I ugly cried at the end of this book. And that is why it has the number 1 spot as my favorite novel of 2020, because I just did not expect that emotional gut punch that I got. And I think really what was so, and also the way Ishiguro crafts the story is so good, because it is really this intense, focused character study, and over the course of which you kind of get a slow reveal that maybe things are not exactly as they seem. And then again, at the end, just that emotional gut punch, because Stevens, the main character, is so close to an insight. He's right there at the edge. And then just goes back to his old ways of thinking, and I was just like, no! But I also think it's probably a pretty accurate representation of how things play out in real life. So if you have not read Ishiguro's wonderful novel, The Remains of the Day, I highly, highly recommend that. Okay, moving on to nonfiction. So honorable mentions in the nonfiction category are Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning, and Eddie S. Glaude Jr.'s Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. And in the top 3 of my nonfiction reads for the year, we have number 3, Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized. I did a full review of this book that I will try to remember to link down below if you want to check that out. Number 2, James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son. And number 1, Claudia Rankine's Just Us, An American Conversation. This book was very thought-provoking. I loved the combination of text and images and graphs and data that Rankine provides throughout the volume. I also really just loved the not even undercurrent, it was like an outright message of you should push yourself to have uncomfortable conversations. That is the only thing that is going to move us all forward and eventually bring us to some sort of understanding of one another and possible unity, is to have those uncomfortable conversations that you don't want to have. And I don't know about y'all, but I really need that reminder, like, on a daily basis. So yes, I highly, highly recommend Claudia Rankine's Just Us, An American Conversation. Alright, so I thought I would make a separate category for anti-racism reading that I did this year, because I did a fair bit of that. So the top 3 books that I read about anti-racism in the year 2020 were number 3, Rini Edo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, which is great to have a British perspective on the issue of race and racism. Number 2, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which is a white writer talking to a white audience about our white feelings. And number 1, Ijeoma Oluwase, So You Want to Talk About Race. I found Aluo's book really well put together. Every chapter starts off with a question. Aluo then explores that question throughout the book. The questions can be things like, what is cultural appropriation? Why can't I say the N-word? What is the school to prison pipeline? Etc., etc. And it's really great as a primer on systemic racism in the United States, but also even as someone who had already, by the time I read Aluo's book, read several other books about anti-racism and was no sort of stranger to the existence of structural racism in the United States. Even I learned stuff from that book, and it challenged me in ways that I felt like were important and significant. It challenged my thinking. And so for that reason, it is my #1 anti-racism read of 2020, and I would recommend it to anyone who is interested in reading stuff about anti-racism. All right, moving on to poetry. So for anti-racism and the rest of these, I just picked 3. So top 3 poetry collections I read in 2020. Number 3, Theodore Roethke's The Collected Poems. Number 2, Evie Shockley's Semiautomatic. And number 1, Layli Long Soldier's Whereas. Whereas was just a beautiful collection. It definitely melded experiential poetry in terms of describing Layli Long Soldier's experience as a Native person living in the United States with experimental poetry in terms of playing with form, structure, language. Her volume is very heavily centered on the use of language and its limitations and how it can be twisted to suit people's own ends. And I just really liked it. I thought it was so smart. And again, I rarely see the experimental married with the experiential in such a deft way. So yeah, definitely if you like experimental avant-garde poetry, I would highly, highly recommend Layli Long Soldier's Whereas. And honestly, even if you prefer the experiential aspect of the collection, I think you would probably still get something useful out of it. Okay, moving along to plays. So the top 3 plays that I read in 2020. So number 3, Lorraine Hansberry's Les Blancs, The Collected Last Plays. Number 2, Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. And number 1, Heinrich Ibsen's 4 Plays. So 4 plays includes A Doll's House, Ghosts, Hedda Gabler, and The Master Builder. And A Doll's House and Ghosts are great indictments of the weaknesses of society. And then the latter 2, Hedda Gabler and The Master Builder, are great indictments of the weaknesses of human nature. And they're just expertly constructed plays. Ibsen has a great sense of how to build tension within the play and how to kind of leave you at, significant cliffhangers between the acts so that you want to keep reading and find out what the heck is going on and what's going to happen. And they also left me thinking, especially Hedda Gabler. By the way, I saw that Roz from Scally Dandling About the Books, I think just today, posted a video where she's in conversation with someone, I'm not sure who, about Ibsen's A Doll's House. So I haven't watched it yet, but check it out if you're interested in reading this, or if you've read A Doll's House before. I'm definitely going to go check it out later today. Okay. And then my last category before I get to my bottom 3 worst reads of 2020. The last category is my top 3 short story collections that I read in 2020. And this could be either a collection of standalone stories, or it could be interconnected stories. And I actually also included in this list some books that are technically marketed as novels, but they're really interconnected stories. So number 3 was Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place. Number 2 was Layla Lalami's Hope and Other Dangerous Pursuits. And the best short story collection I read in 2020 was Shobha Rao's An Unrestored Woman. Also, I will mention here that all 3 of these authors I read for the first time in 2020, so that was very exciting too. But yeah, Shobha Rao's collection, Unrestored Woman, was really powerful. Every 2, like the first 2 stories, second 2 stories, third 2 stories, etc., they're all sort of paired together in some way. Either they're similar in theme, there's a recurring character, they take place, in the same location, or something like that. So there's somehow, every 2 stories are somehow linked together. And it's about partition. And it's just, like I said, it's really powerful. There are a variety of topics and subjects covered. The role of women, as probably implied by the title, is really heavily emphasized, and this was a book that it was sort of so hard-hitting that I actually had to like put it down and take a break from it for a few days because a couple of the stories just hit me so hard and they were so rough to read. But I think for that reason it's probably also an important read as well. So moving on, now I'm going to get to my worst reads of 2020. So number 3, Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. Number 2, Imre Kertész's Cottage for a Child Not Born. And number 1, the worst book I read in 2020 was Frank Kermode's The Sense of an Ending. And this is a book of literary criticism that was originally given as a series of lectures at Bryn Mawr, I believe. And it just really exemplifies everything that I don't like about literary theory and criticism in general, which is that it obfuscates instead of illuminating. It uses jargon and a lot of complex language instead of making an argument that is clear and direct. It doesn't make the connections between points for you. It expects you to do all that work on your own. And then finally, Kermode just assumes that you have the same knowledge that he does about all of the texts that he talks about. And it's a wide variety of texts. Why would he assume that I know what all of these things are or have read all of these things? So yeah, it just really embodied everything that I do not like about literary criticism, and thus it was, in fact, my worst read of 2020. But I will say that on this list of my bottom 3 worst reads, none of them were 1-star reads. I had no 1-star reads in 2020, which was great. So those 3 books were all 2-star reads, which means they at least had some sort of merit in them. So, you know, obviously feel free to check them out regardless. You may well disagree with me, especially about Arundhati Roy's book, because I think that one's very polarizing. It's either you love it or hate it kind of book. So anyway, those were my best and worst reads of 2020. Thank you for watching. If you have a favorite book that you read in 2020 and want to share it, I would love to hear about that. Please let me know down in the comments below. Also, if you have comments about any of the books I've mentioned, I would love to hear that too. Let me know. So yeah, I hope y'all are doing well and staying healthy. Hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?